Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics and what's known as the Access Fellow here at Jesus College at the University of Oxford. Now, what and how many extracurriculars do you need to get into Oxford? Well, this is going to be a really short video potentially because the answer is none. You do not need extracurriculars. Unlike Ivy League universities like Harvard and Yale, where having a string of impressive extracurriculars may be essential, for the University of Oxford, you do not need any extracurriculars, but you do need what are called supercurriculars. Now, I'll explain the differences between them and I'll explain exactly what sorts of supercurricular experiences you need. The headline is that supercurricular experiences are not directly likely to get you into the University of Oxford, but they have an enormous indirect impact. And if you want to find out why, you're going to have to carry on watching. All right, so let's dive into it. I've got some slides. I'm going to have to wear my tinted glasses because I'm half blind. All right, so just bear with me on that. So super and extracurriculars. I mean, a crucial starting point is what I'm even talking about here. You know, what are the differences between supercurriculars, extracurriculars, and all of that sort of stuff? There's quite a lot of vocab going on here, and it's important to be clear what I'm talking about and what exactly you may need in order to be a really competitive applicant at a university like Oxford. So first of all, extracurriculars. Well, extracurriculars include things like hobbies, sport, drama, music, leadership positions, jobs or work experiences, or any care responsibilities that you may have. So these are things that you are doing outside of your curriculum being your school curriculum. And these are things you're doing that are non-academic, not related at all to your academic interests beyond your curriculum, hence extracurricular. And as mentioned, for some competitive universities outside the UK, these things are helpful. Even within the UK, some universities do look to admit a well-rounded student who has a number of different experiences beyond their academic work. But for Oxford and Cambridge universities, we're not looking for all-rounders. We're looking for actually quite narrowly focused, highly skilled individuals. And that's where supercurriculars become much more relevant. So a supercurricular is something that is academically relevant, such as reading books and articles, listening to podcasts, watching lectures on YouTube, and experiencing various things that might be relevant, such as attending a court case in the public gallery if you want to study law. Okay, extracurricular activities can be supercurricular. So there's a bit of a Venn diagram where what could be considered to be extracurricular, such as playing a musical instrument, might obviously have some academic relevance if you are planning to study music. Similarly, if you take part in a lot of sport, then you can perhaps help us understand the relevance of that to your academic interests if you're planning to study something like medicine or biomedical sciences or biochemistry, where playing sport could introduce you to a whole host of entirely relevant academic puzzles. But generally speaking, things like sport and being good at sport will help you in no way get into Oxford. We do not have sporting scholarships and we do not have any sort of advantage given to anyone who's good at sport, which, thank God, because I would have been in trouble otherwise, because I'm not good at sport. Okay, so what specifically do you need? Well, there's no particular sort of list. You know, if there was a specific list of supercurricular activities that we were looking for, we would publish it. We're not that evil. We would just tell you, this is the list, go and do it to the best of your ability. So that's why a lot of people get slightly anxious, because it does seem a bit nebulous, a bit vague. What is it that these universities want from me? And it's troublesome, and I completely sympathise with that. So what you need concretely is proof of your academic potential. And what that means is that we want to get a sense that you are ready to be an undergraduate. So supercurricular activities are those things that take you beyond your school curriculum, hence supercurricular, and they are basically you pretending to be an undergraduate student. You're doing the sort of stuff that undergraduate students do, and that makes you credible. It means you've got evidence that you're ready to start your studies. A lot of people will come to applying for university places and will say things like, I'm very passionate about mathematics. I'm really interested in medical sciences. What they don't have is any proof of that. They can't concretely say, and because of my fascination in mathematics and because of my interest in medicine, I've read this, I've done that, I've looked at the other, right? That's what you need. You need some concrete proof. And you don't need a lot of it, by the way. In fact, quality is very much more important than quantity, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But you need some proof. And so what we're aiming for with supercurricular activities is to basically pretend like you're an undergraduate for a few days in the run-up to applying for university, because then you've got some evidence you can point to say you're ready. Okay. Now, to make this even more concrete, I'll show you the decision algorithm that we use. So, what criteria do we use when selecting between competitive candidates? So what I've got here is the admissions criteria for PPE, which is Philosophy, Politics and Economics at the University of Oxford. That's the degree that I'm most familiar with. But these admissions criteria are very similar to other degrees, and indeed with a quick search online you can find the admissions criteria for any degree that you're interested in. And as you can see, we're looking for application and interest, we're looking for reasoning ability, and we're looking for communication skills. Okay, and these three core elements will be gauged through a range of data. We'll look at school results, we'll look at your personal statement, we'll look at your teacher reference on your UCAS application form. We will use admissions tests for many, but not all of our degree programs. We will use interviews. And in all of those forms of data, we're looking for evidence to fulfill these criteria. Okay? Now, supercurricular activities will help you in all of these aspects. Okay, so they won't directly help you get into Oxford. We're not looking for you to fulfill a checklist. We're not looking for you to have read certain books or to have listened to certain podcasts or to have watched certain lectures online. But if you do those things, you will enrich every aspect of your application. It will enhance your application and interest in the subject. It will make you more interested, right? Pursuing things that you care about beyond the curriculum will make you more interested, and it'll mean you'll have more stuff to talk about if you need illustrations of what you're interested in an interview, for example. Okay. It will also improve your reasoning ability, because supercurricular activities will often expose you to the reasoning abilities of other thinkers. And the best way to engage in supercurricular activities is to think about them for yourself, reflect on them. So don't just passively read a book, for example, but read it and think about it and think, what do I think about this? What's my view on this? And tell us in your personal statement what your view is on what you've read. Don't just tell us you've read stuff, tell us what you thought about it. Okay, so it will improve your reasoning ability. It will also improve your communication ability if, in the process of these supercurricular activities, you get used to thinking out loud and sharing your thoughts with those around you. Could be friends and family, doesn't need to be subject experts at all. But just getting used to explaining in simple terms what your views are on the things you've experienced is what we're looking for. Okay, so going back to the slides, let's move on to the next point, which is, how should you start? Well, the key thing with supercurriculars is just to start. Now, I know that might be a bit of an annoying thing to say, given you're not necessarily sure what you need to do, but there's an important phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect, which you'll be completely familiar with, which is that thinking about some big task or project is very much worse than actually doing it. And once you start doing the task, you'll feel compelled to finish it. So procrastination is just the big problem, but the way to fix it is just to start. Just dive in, just do something, anything, even if it's just 5 minutes. Even if after this video you spend 5 minutes starting on your supercurricular journey, great. There's a great Japanese proverb which I love, which is relevant to this, which is Anzuru yori umu ga yasushi, which means that the thinking of something is harder than the doing. So just do it, just start today, okay? And you also need to sort of work out your timing, so work backwards. There's another great law which I love, which is called Parkinson's law, which is that the amount of time the task will take is equal to the amount of time allotted to the task. It's actually a bit of a joke. It's basically saying that we will all work to the deadline. And so you need to know what your deadlines are. So applying to Oxford has a hard deadline in mid-October. And so you need to work backwards from that to work out how much time you've got and come up with an accurate and reasonable plan of what you can do in the time you've got. How can you pretend to be an undergraduate student in the time you have available to you? And one of the best ways of actually concretely going about doing this is to develop SMART goals, SMART plans. So those are things that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Pardon me. Excuse me. So I can give you some examples. So these are potential examples for supercurricular experiences that are SMART. for someone who is interested in studying law at Oxford or someone who is interested in studying medicine at Oxford. So for law, you could learn about a court case, right? So that will take you beyond your school curriculum, because unless you're studying law at school, which is not common, then learning about court cases will be something new. Okay, so you could, in pursuit of that, watch some legal cases on YouTube. You could attend your local court, which is possible in many countries, or you could read about a past case, and court rulings are often published online, especially from the higher courts. So that's something that is specific and measurable. Is it attainable? Yes, because you can use local and freely available resources. Is it relevant? Yes, because fundamentally this is what law undergraduates do. Law undergraduates, day in and day out, will read law cases. They will read about law reports and they will think about them. So if you start doing that, you are pretending to be a law undergraduate and you are doing the absolutely perfect sorts of supercurricular activities. Is it time bound? Set yourself a limit. Say I'm going to do 3 hours within 1 week, something reasonable, and split that up into sort of 30-minute chunks every day. Don't do it all in one go, because that can be very tiring and it can be disruptive of your other commitments in life. So little and often is very much the key. So let's say you're thinking of applying to study medicine. Well, you might want to do something specific, like read up about sadness. Now, why have I chosen that? I'll explain a bit later how you can choose things to look into. But I'm really intrigued by why human beings evolved to be sad. Thinking about Darwinian theory, what was the comparative advantage for some long-distant ancestor of ours in surviving by being sad occasionally? I just find that really fascinating. So that's a sort of question that I might look into. So that's something quite specific. And I could then measurably look into it by finding a book or a research article. And again, it's completely attainable, it's totally relevant, and it's time-bound. Okay, so these are examples of the sorts of things by which you can pretend to be an undergraduate student and therefore have plenty of proof when the time comes, and in meeting all of those admissions criteria that I showed earlier. Now, what should you look into? I'm often asked, what should I read? And I'll give you some examples of resources that we recommend. But fundamentally, we're looking for independent learners, people who have the get up and go, who care about stuff and are passionate about stuff on their own. So why not try and pose a question you'd like to answer? Not a question that someone else has told you ought to be interested in, but one that you are authentically interested in yourself, that's relevant to your subject. And I've called this the toddler technique because it's the sort of thing that young children do all the time, right? They ask great questions like, why is the sky blue? So I've come up with a few sort of questions that my inner toddler has come up with, okay, just to give you a few examples. So I've already mentioned, why did sadness evolve, which I think might be quite interesting for someone applying to something like medicine. Why doesn't the sea get saltier? So for someone thinking of applying for geology or earth sciences or geography, that's a question I don't know the answer to. I'd really like to know, I know roughly how the sea gets salty in the first place, but I don't know why it doesn't just keep getting saltier and saltier until all the fish and all the animals die. So I'd be happy to look into that. Why is Hamlet better than Coriolanus? So if you're thinking of like English literature, how do quantum computers work? And why does 0 factorial equal 1? So these are all questions that my sort of inner toddler has come up with. And you've got loads as well, I'm sure. So just allow that inner toddler to go on a bit of a rampage and put them in the sandbox. Start exploring things, Make your life relatively easy to start with by looking at accessible resources like Wikipedia, like YouTube, like TikTok perhaps, although be careful with the reliability of that source. There's Oxplore, which is excellent, which is, if you go to oxplore.org, it's the home of big questions. It's a University of Oxford resource, which is really helpful. And of course, rely on the resources all around you. Your teachers, your friends, your relatives, and yourself, of course. But start sort of exploring some ideas and come up with some questions you'd like to answer, because that will really focus and it will help your SMART goals be really specific. Because specific is good. If you have sort of general interests, that's not really going to give you much helpful evidence. If you have quite specific interests, that tends to be a better supercurricular. Okay. Now, you should also develop passion, and you should develop passion for a relatively simple reason, which is because people who are passionate do everything better. They commit their relatively scarce resources of time and patience and energy far more efficiently than people who are not passionate. Okay, so be passionate. Right? How are you supposed to know what you're passionate about? That's a really interesting question. I mean, the trick is you've got to chase the dopamine. So that little sort of woo thrill that you occasionally get from all sorts of phenomena, like, you know, getting a like on a social media post, to a bus coming around the corner once you've been waiting for it for 2 hours or whatever, or you know, in more sort of serious and potentially dangerous contexts, you get a dopamine hit when you win in gambling. And of course, you can synthetically produce dopamine highs with stuff like cocaine. Don't do that. Okay. But nonetheless, you can also just get this sort of this thrill, and it's really interesting because dopamine is to do with sort of managing our scarce resources and committing us to long-term sort of commitment to certain difficult goals. So in other words, things like, you know, our Neolithic ancestors would have been hunting, and in order to make sure that they didn't just quit hunting, they would get a dopamine hit once they had finally succeeded in their hunt, and they would get that sort of relief and that sort of thrill. And that's what you're looking for. Sometimes you may have noticed that when you find out a fact about the world or you read a particular book, it gives you that sort of really contented sense of, I've found something, I understand the world a bit better. That's most likely dopamine. And you've just got to dive down that rabbit hole. Once you feel that thrill, chase it, because it will make you so much more powerful. It will mean that you develop much more interesting and much deeper, richer understanding of particular problems, and you will be so much more of a credible undergraduate, because that's what undergraduates do. They have to determine their own curriculum. Okay, so this is why we want people to do super curricular activities, because the curriculum, to a very significant extent at university, will be up to you. Okay, now, what do you do if you don't know what you're passionate about, or if you're passionate about loads of stuff? Well, be scientific. Just test some hypotheses. Let's say you've got a lot of interests. Spend a day, I mean, not a whole day, but, you know, half an hour or an hour of a day pretending to be an undergraduate student of a particular subject or a particular topic that you think you're interested in. Go and explore that sandbox, go and read some stuff that you think you might be interested in. And if at the end of testing that hypothesis you determine, actually, do you know what, that wasn't as fun as I thought it might be, then test another hypothesis. Okay, maybe I'm interested in a different subject or a different angle. Okay, so just be rigorous. Don't be seized and paralyzed by the fear of, I don't know what I want, I don't know what I'm interested in. Do something. Remember the Zeigarnik effect. Just do, and don't overthink it. Okay, and what should you think about with regards to quality? Well, don't go for just loads and loads of stuff. We're not looking for a long list of things you've read or stuff you've watched or whatever. Quality is so much more important. We also want some self-reflection. So when you talk about these things in your personal statement, tell us what you took away from them. Tell us what you thought. Okay, don't just give us a long shopping list of books you've read. Give us some self-reflection. But in terms of how you are supposed to know whether or not it's good enough, there are a couple of sort of basic tricks. I mean, first of all, we provide examples of suggested subject resources. So if you just search online for suggested subject resources Oxford, you'll find this page, and it's got a huge list for every subject that we offer, and loads of great resources there. So that's a good place to start. Another thing to think about is, if it's something that's been produced by a university, such as Oxford University Press, then you know it's the right level. You know it's the sort of things that undergraduates read. Basically, whilst you want to start looking into subjects in a fairly easy and accessible way, you want to climb the mountain fairly quickly and do stuff that undergraduates do. And what undergraduates don't do is just read popular works that everyone's reading. But that's what we often see on personal statements. We often see people say, I've read this popular book about medicine, for example, but I haven't read anything that is kind of relevant to an undergraduate medical degree. And that's going to make us a little bit worried that you are not actually ready to be a medical student. So you want to try and ramp up the difficulty a little bit. You can also use academic papers that are typically published by universities. So here's an example from Imperial College. This paper is probably one of the most impactful papers of my lifetime, because it's what led to lockdown during COVID-19. It came from Imperial College London. It's got a fairly innocuous title, Report 9, Impact of Non-Pharmaceutical Interventions to Reduce COVID-19 Mortality and Healthcare Demand, published by Professor Neil Ferguson and his team. But it's what led to lockdown, and specifically this chart that projected death rates if there was no lockdown and no social distancing is what sharpened the government's mind in March 2020. The point being, if you read resources that are at the level of a university, then you are acting as an undergraduate. And it's that pretending to be an undergraduate that's going to make you much more credible in your supercurriculars. So, conclusions. What extracurriculars do you need to get into Oxford? None. You may need extracurriculars to get into other British universities, so don't quit them, and do talk about them in your personal statement. The general rule of thumb is about 80-20. 80% of your personal statement should be about supercurriculars, 20% on extracurriculars. In terms of what supercurriculars you need to pretend like you're an Oxford undergraduate or an undergraduate at any university, and go and read the sort of stuff that they would read. Go and look into the stuff that they would look into, and for goodness sake, think about it. Okay, I'm going to have a follow-up video in a couple of weeks going into more depth about how you can reflect on what you've looked into and how you can start to make the most of those supercurricular experiences. But I think that will do for today. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.